Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. Let me see. I think it's got it here, sound-wise. Okay. Well, just roll with it, I guess. This morning we'll be in Mark chapter 5, verse 21 through verse 43. Let's see if this will work. Okay. When Jesus had crossed again in a boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered round him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the synagogue rulers, named Jairus, came up, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He asked him urgently, "My little daughter is near death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be healed and live." Jesus went with him, and a large crowd followed and pressed around him. Now a woman was there who had been suffering from a hemorrhage for 12 years. She had endured a great deal under the care of many doctors, and had spent all that she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, for she kept saying, "If only I touch his clothes, I will be healed." At once the bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Jesus knew at once that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" His disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing against you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" But he looked around to see who had done it. Then the woman, with fear and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, people came from the synagogue ruler's house, saying, "Your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher any longer?" But Jesus, paying no attention to what was said, told the synagogue ruler, "Do not be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the synagogue ruler, where he saw noisy confusion and people weeping and wailing loudly. When he entered, he said to them, "Why are you distressed and weeping? The child is not dead, but asleep." And they began making fun of him. But he put them all outside, and he took the child's father and mother and his own companions and went into the room where the child was. Then gently taking the child by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." The girl got up at once and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. They were completely astonished at this. He strictly ordered that no one should know about this and told them to give her something to eat. Yeah. So you have a couple miraculous instances here with Jesus. One where a teacher, a ruler of the, what was it? Synagogue rulers named Jairus, is asking for help for his little daughter who's near death. But you see, Jairus says to him, "Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be healed and live." Jairus has faith that Jesus has the ability to heal her. And so too this woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years also believes that Jesus can heal her. "If only I touch his clothes, I will be healed." And Jesus, after the report that comes to them, to Jairus, saying that his daughter had died, Jesus says to Jairus, Jesus said, do not be afraid, just believe. So, just highlighting the importance of faith and believing that God is capable of doing what he said he can do. So, the ruler of the synagogue was like a modern-day pastor. He managed both the spiritual and the business affairs of the synagogue. This man came in desperation to Jesus because his daughter was at the point of death. As synagogue ruler, he was a lay official responsible for supervision of the building and arranging the service. "Come and lay your hands on her, that she may be healed." This man had great confidence in Jesus, and he believed that Jesus had all power to heal his daughter. But he also believed that Jesus should be there for it to happen. It may be that the man held a firm superstition in his mind, believing that the healer had to be present. It may be that he was just accustomed to thinking that way and never really thought about a person being healed in a different way. Whatever the reason, his thinking put Jesus in a box. To heal my daughter, you have to come and lay your hands on her. When a Roman centurion came to Jesus in a similar situation in Luke 7, 1-10, Jesus didn't even go to the centurion's house to heal the servant. He simply pronounced him healed from a distance. But there, Jesus did not demand that Jairus show the same faith the centurion had. Jesus responded to the faith Jairus had. Jesus asks us to give him the faith that we have. This was weakness of faith, far short of that of the centurion, who yet was a Roman soldier, whereas Jairus was a learned Jew. Knowledge is therefore one thing, faith another, and the greatest scholars are not always the holiest men. Adam Clarke noticed 4 things displayed by Jairus that are necessary for answered prayer. We must put ourselves in the presence of Jesus. We must humble ourselves sincerely before Jesus. We must lay open our request with a holy earnestness. And we must have total confidence in the power and the goodness of Jesus. The woman who had a hemorrhage here, which any bodily discharge made someone unclean. So this woman was in a state of perpetual ceremonial uncleanness for the last 12 years. This uncleanness did not allow them to take part in any aspect of Israel's worship. By the very law of her people, she was divorced from her husband and could not live in her home. She was ostracized from all society and must not come into contact with her old friends. She was excommunicated from the services of the synagogue and thus shut out from the women's court in the temple. But she went to physicians, but she had suffered many things from them. She went to the doctors to get better, but only suffered worse and became poorer. Luke the physician also tells us that she had spent all her livelihood on physicians. He knew how doctor bills could take away all the money a family had. The ancient rabbis had many different formulas to help a woman afflicted like this. Rabbi Johanan says, "Take of gum of Alexandria, of alum, and of Quercus hortensis, the weight of a zuzi each, let them be bruised together and given in wine to the woman that hath an issue of blood. But if this fail, take of Persian onions 9 logs, boil them in wine, and give it to her to drink, and say, Arise from the flu. But should this fail, set her in a place where 2 ways meet, and let her hold a cup of wine in her hand, and let somebody come behind and affright her, and say, Arise from thy flu. But should this do no good?" And so on and so forth. When a soul is sick today, they often go to different doctors and spend a great deal of time and money, only to suffer many things from many physicians. A sick soul may go to Dr. Entertainment, but find no cure. They may pay a visit to Dr. Success, but he is no help in the long run. Dr. Pleasure, Dr. Self-Help, or Dr. Religion can't bring a real cure. Only Dr. Jesus can. Amen to that. "If only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well." Because this woman's condition was embarrassing, and because she was ceremonially unclean and would be condemned for touching Jesus, or even being in a pressing crowd, She wanted to do this secretly. She would not openly ask Jesus to be healed, but she thought, if only I might touch his clothes, I shall be made well. Since we have no evidence in the Bible that Jesus healed this way before, it seems that the woman acted at least partially on superstition. Her faith had elements of error and superstition, yet she did believe in the healing power of Jesus, and the border of his garment served as a point of contact for that faith. There were many things that we could find wrong with this woman's faith. Nevertheless, her faith was in Jesus, and the object of faith is much more important than the quality of faith. Matthew 9:20 says she touched the hem of his garment, and that actually means one of the borders of the outer garment that all Jews wore. Every devout Jew wore an outer robe with 4 tassels on it, one at each corner. These tassels were worn in obedience to the command in Numbers, and they were to signify to others and to remind the man himself that the wearer was a member of the chosen people of God. And immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up. According to the thinking of that day, when this unclean woman touched Jesus, it would make him unclean. But because of the nature of Jesus and the power of God, that wasn't how it worked. When she touched his garment, Jesus wasn't made unclean. The woman was made whole. When we come to Jesus with our sin and lay it upon him, it doesn't make him a sinner, but it makes us clean. Who touched my clothes? Robertson says that Jesus more literally said, "Who touched me on my clothes?" Her goal wasn't to touch the clothes of Jesus, but to touch Jesus. The clothes just happened to be part of Jesus, the part of Jesus she could touch. Because this woman was embarrassed and thought her uncleanness meant no one would let her touch Jesus, she tried to do it secretly. But God often brings his work out into the open, even if it may start secretly. And he looked around to see who had done this thing. This was before she revealed herself. Jesus knew all along exactly who touched him and received the healing. He asked, "Who touched my clothes?" for the benefit of the woman, not because he didn't know who the person was. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. Jesus made her go through this, although he knew who she was, and she knew who she was. It might seem that his only purpose was to embarrass the poor woman before others, but that wasn't the purpose at all. Jesus did it so that she would know she was healed. It is true that Mark tells us she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction, but the woman was like any other person. Soon she would begin to doubt and fear, wondering if she really was healed. She would wonder when the ailment might return, but Jesus told her, "Go in peace and be healed of your affliction." Jesus called her out so that she would absolutely know that she was healed. Jesus did it so that others would know she was healed. This woman had an ailment that no one could see, and that made her a public outcast. It would sound suspicious to many if she just announced that she was healed. They would think that she made it up just to be considered clean again. Jesus called her out so that others would absolutely know that she was healed. And Jesus did it so that she would know why she was healed. When Jesus said, "Daughter, your faith has made you well," it showed the woman that it really wasn't touching the clothing of Jesus that healed her. Instead, it was her faith in Jesus and what he could do for her. Jesus did it because he didn't want her to think she stole a blessing. Jesus did it so that Jairus could see this woman's faith and be encouraged regarding his daughter. Jesus did it because he wanted to bless her in a special way. He called her daughter. Jesus never called any other person by this name. Jesus wanted her to come forth and hear this special name of tenderness. It seemed cruel, but it was really kind. It sent her home with loftier thoughts of him. She would never talk of the wonder of the tassel. She would always talk of the wonder of the Lord. Permitted to walk away without confession, she would have said exultantly, "I've found a cure." Now the woman cried, "I've found a friend." Jesus may ask us to do things that seem embarrassing today. He doesn't ask us to do them just because he wants to embarrass us. There's also a higher purpose, even if we can't see it. But if avoiding embarrassment is the most important thing in our life, then pride is our God. We are more in love with ourselves and with our self-image than we are in love with Jesus. Yeah. And so too, I think the example of this woman healed from internal hemorrhaging should be a good example for us as believers who, though externally people can't notice a difference in us, internally and our history, we have been changed by Jesus, and we should announce that to other people. Your daughter is dead. Jairus' heart sank when he heard this. He must have thought, I knew this was taking too long. I knew Jesus shouldn't have wasted his time on this silly woman. Now the situation is beyond hope. Do not be afraid, only believe. Jesus told Jairus to do two things. First, to stop being afraid. It sounds almost cruel for Jesus to say this to a man who just lost his daughter, but Jesus knew that fear and faith don't go together. Before Jairus could really trust Jesus, he had to decide to put away fear. Second, Jesus told Jairus to only believe. Don't try to believe and be afraid at the same time. Don't try to believe and figure it all out. Don't try to believe and make sense of the delay. Instead, only believe. There was a tumult, and those who wept and wailed loudly. In that day, it was customary to hire professional mourners to add to the atmosphere of grief and pain at a funeral. But the professional mourners only grieved superficially. Notice how quickly they turned from weeping to ridicule. Since even the poorest man was required by common custom to hire a minimum of 2 flute players and 1 professional mourner in the event of his wife's death, it is probable that one who held the rank of a synagogue ruler would be expected to hire a large number of professional mourners. Little girl, I say to you, arise. Jesus spoke to a dead girl as if she were alive, and he did this because he is God. Romans 4:17 says that God gives life to the dead and calls those things which do not exist as though they did. Jesus spoke to this girl with the power of God, and she was raised from the dead. They were overcome with great amazement. Jesus didn't fail Jairus, and he didn't fail the woman who needed healing. But in ministering to both, he needed to stretch the faith of Jairus extra far. In all this, we see how the work of Jesus is different, yet the same among each individual. If Jesus can touch each need so personally, he can touch our needs the same way. Yeah. Carrying on here. Psalm 38, verses 1 through 22. O Lord, do not continue to rebuke me in your anger. Do not continue to punish me in your raging fury. For your arrows pierce me, and your hand presses me down. My whole body is sick because of your judgment. I am deprived of health because of my sin. For my sins overwhelm me. Like a heavy load, they are too much for me to bear. My wounds are infected and starting to smell because of my foolish sins. I am dazed and completely humiliated. All day long I walk around mourning, for I am overcome with shame, and my whole body is sick. I am numb with pain and severely battered. I groan loudly because of the anxiety I feel. O Lord, you understand my heart's desire. My groaning is not hidden from you. My heart beats quickly. My strength leaves me. I can hardly see. Because of my condition, even my friends and acquaintances keep their distance. My neighbors stand far away. Those who seek my life try to entrap me. Those who want to harm me speak destructive words. All day long they say deceitful things, but I am like a deaf man. I hear nothing. I am like a mute who cannot speak. I am like a man who cannot hear and is incapable of arguing his defense. Yet I will wait for you, O Lord. You will respond, O Lord, my God. I've prayed for deliverance, because otherwise they will gloat over me. When my foot slips, they will arrogantly taunt me. For I am about to stumble, and I am in constant pain. Yes, I confess my wrongdoing, and I am concerned about my sins. But those who are my enemies for no reason are numerous. Those who hate me without cause outnumber me. They repay me evil for the good I have done. Though I have tried to do good to them, they hurl accusations at me. Do not abandon me, O Lord. My God, do not remain far away from me. Hurry up and help me, O Lord, my deliverer. Yeah. And it's interesting. The psalmist here in, what is it? My sins overwhelm me. Like a heavy load, they are too much for me to bear. My wounds are infected and starting to smell because of my foolish sins. Talking about his sins that he had committed and the effect that they're having on him. Yeah. I was getting a impression that these were unconfessed. Yeah, in verse 18, yes, I confess my wrongdoing and I am concerned about my sins. I think it's important. Like, the psalmist illustrates that these unconfessed sins are like a festering wound that's growing putrid. And like a festering wound that's growing putrid, our unconfessed sins can putrefy in our lives. So it's important to confess our sins one to another and to confess them to Christ first and foremost, but to also confess to one another, because sin so often holds this power over us that, if they knew what I did, then they wouldn't like me anymore. But it's important to realize that we're all sinners, and unconfessed sin will often be repeated sin. Okay, and finally here, Proverbs 10, 8 and 9. The wise person accepts instructions, but the one who speaks foolishness will come to ruin. The one who conducts himself in integrity will live securely, but the one who behaves perversely will be found out. Yeah. Yeah, and even if you hide your secret sin, eventually it will be found out. Anywho, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day. Bye.